All right. Hi, Donncha. How are you?
I'm not too bad now. How are you?
Good. So, just to confirm, you agree to have this interview session recorded, correct?
I agree to this, yes.
Okay. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce QA pillars. We are here to basically support other QAs by
Mhm.
um, conducting mock interviews so that we can prepare for our future job opportunities. And yeah, uh, the goal is also to ask questions related to the topics that you mentioned before. So that is test execution and management, test
Mhm.
planning and design, and regression testing. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, yeah, let's start. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Marjorie. You can call me Marge. I am also a software QA specialist working for a telco company right now, and I have 8 years of experience both in manual and automation testing. So, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Donncha Murphy. I basically have about 5 years experience in QA. I started basically my QA journey, and I started working for a company called JRI, which is a company. It's like an American subsidiary of a Japanese bank, and they have a branch here in Ireland, in Kerry, in Tralee. So I started there after I finished my IT course. So for some context, I did a history and politics degree and then 2 years in cloud computing, where I did things like Java and C Sharp and virtualization. I learned the basics of IT. Then I decided QA was the best fit for me at the time because it makes basically my critical thinking skills I learned from my history and politics degree and my technical knowledge from the IT degree. So QA seemed like a good, blend of those skills. So I began working in GRI basically 2018 in 2018. So basically began under the tutelage of a more senior QA engineer. Um, she basically was working on a payment system, so I began my testing there. I began basically by executing manual tests, and that's where I started learning the various techniques and skills of QA. There's also some automation as well. So we're using a tool called UFT as running off Quality Center. So we create automated tests, we run them, and then once the tests, we'd see if they passed or failed. And then the question began once, if it failed, did it fail because there was a bug, or did it fail because the automation itself wasn't working correctly? Once I moved on from that, I got the opportunity basically to herald my own product. So there came an opportunity to basically become more or less QA lead for a suite of products that were for securities and equities, basically trading. It was a mobile product for the company, and it was a tier one product, which basically meant that it's the highest priority product as it's where the bank kind of made its money. So I took control of this, and this was a huge challenge and a huge opportunity for me all at once because uh, it was basically a mess in terms of QA. There was really no QA before this. The test cases were the ones that existed weren't very good. The setup of the product was very convoluted and complex due to its age, because you have to remember we're dealing with a bank here, and the bank a Japanese bank. So banks are conservative. Japanese banks are hyper conservative. So this product was about 20 years old, and it was very old, very difficult to get set up to begin testing. But I basically took on this endeavor. And I created a suite of manual tests, and I was involved in various builds because we worked up a build cycle, 3 builds during the year: the March build, July build, and November build. And I was able to create test cases with the help of my Japanese colleagues because, again, it's tier one. I was in direct contact with the one of the directors for the securities and equities team. Um, and with that, we were able to make some significant progress. Now, the big project that was involved with this was the fast patching. So there was a massive upgrade for the product being brought in. As a result of that, we needed to create a fast patching regression test suite first, which was going to be run every second and third month. So we patched on the Friday of the first week, and then the Friday the second week, sorry. And for that, I'll be following pre-patch testing, and after that, we post-patch testing, and then we compare the results and see if there's any discrepancy. Now, this was a quite complex endeavor to do because there wasn't a lot of knowledge surrounding this product to begin with due to its age. So I basically had to gather knowledge from my various stakeholders on what we needed to test for regression every month, what was the most important functionality, and I needed to find out how exactly it should work, what the expected results are. Then we needed to work again on post-patch testing, where that would be different, what extra work would we do, and how we would compare the results. So that was a huge project. It took about a year. Then when it finally came in, it was kind of a rush because we were told it was going to be delayed for a few months, and then we received a message from the director saying we need it in 3 weeks. So as you can tell, there was a lot of like panic and a lot of work done in that regard. But we had done so much work before that; it actually wasn't as bad as it could have been. So I kind of fell back on my previous, due diligence. That project went in basically with the Japanese team being quite happy with us, and we were able to basically get in on time. We did our pre-patch testing, which was a series of manual tests, and then we did post-patch testing, normal series of manual tests, and we used a comparison tool that they had created to compare the results and see if there's any discrepancies. And if there were, we had to raise it, and we would perform that every second and third week. Then I moved on from there. I kept on working on that, but then I had got a new product, which was a compliance product, which was basically when sending a message, it would go through this compliance filter. And if you are on the OFAC list and if you are basically a sanctioned individual or sanctioned country, you should get flagged and stopped in this product. And so it was my responsibility to take this product and start testing it. So we had a huge project come in for that, which was called ISO. So they were changing the message format for that. As a result of that, it was up to me to create the test strategy for that, along with the test cases and test matrices as well. That basically went in went in like last year, and again went pretty well. I was working with mainly the American team on that. The challenges for that were quite different in many ways compared to what I was doing with the Japanese team, but in some ways it was kind of easier and harder in various ways. And since then, I've just been performing various testing from that point on these products, regression testing, and that's basically brought me up to my current stage of my career.
Okay. Just a few quick questions. For the regression testing, you mentioned
Mm.
earlier that you had experience with HPUFT, correct?
Yeah, UFT, yeah.
Okay. So, were your regression tests created? Uh, did you create automation testing for your regression or?
Yes, we did. This was mainly for the payments product I worked on. So we had to create automation testing for sending payments through. So basically, we would we created a suite of various payments that went through for various sections of the test. So, for example, we had Swift messages, we had FedRAP messages, or not FedRAP messages, we had chips messages, and we would create the UFT. I would just help the engineer, they create the framework, and we would create the test steps in UFT, and then we'd put them in and then we'd fire them through. And then again, the question became, it can be quite challenging at times, but does make it easier in the long run. And again, the question then when we create the tests, automate test scripts, and put them through is sometimes they would fail because they'd be like a run error, which is basically just the automation just not quite working. And then sometimes as well, if they fail, there could be a bug. So yeah, I do have experience working with UFT.
Okay. So I'd like to step back a little bit and focus on the topics that you mentioned. Uh, but first, are those your day-to-day tasks, or do you have other day-to-day tasks? Sorry, I cannot speak today.
No, so in day-to-day tests, so we work on a build cycle. So we don't really do day-to-day tests. We do basically project tests. So basically, the standard test really that is my kind of baseline test for my security products is basically sending trades through and seeing that they hit the intended targets in terms of external applications. So if I send a trade through, then it will go to our payments product, and it will also get hit in our message confirmation product, and also get sent basically to our product for our customer facing product. That's basically the baseline test for my security and equities product. We have a combination of various types of messages because you have to remember in banking there's numerous types of message types. So there's like 103 or 202, depending if you're sending to if you're sending to just a customer or sending to another bank, or if you're sending to a bank in another country. So I have a suite basically of those, a combination of those tests for that product. For the Microsoft, which was the compliance product, we basically had a day-to-day test of basically sending messages through with people on the OFAC list or countries on the OFAC list, making sure it gets hit. And then having some messages that don't have the OFAC list and make sure that they don't get hit. And that's kind of like the baseline of functionality we have. So for day-to-day tests, I basically have a baseline of functionality I expect, which is the most common functionality of the product itself.
Okay. So how much of your time is dedicated to manual testing and automation testing? And also, I see on your CV that you have experience with mobile applications.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I would say most of my day is done with manual testing, because it is quite difficult to automate the product we're using, basically, because it's so old. We are currently working on that, using a product called Eggplant, but that's still in early days, because Eggplant, works at the latitude and longitude of the product itself. It doesn't require any scripting knowledge in that regard. So right now, most of it is manual. So I would say most of my day, but we are working on getting more automation for the older products. As for that though, the compliance product I work on that has a lot of automation already, actually, because we were able to draw from some previous automation from our payments product. So with that, I was able. So that one is more like 50-50, I would say, at this stage. We're still trying to work on seeing if we can get more automation with that. As for the mobile product, yeah, I do have experience with the mobile product. The securities and equities product I was referring to, that is a mobile product. So it's literally just a mobile product the customer would use for trading purposes, basically. So that I've worked on that for about 3 years, so I have a good lot of experience in that regard.
Okay. And what approach was this? Were you doing agile or
So
waterfall?
yeah, so this was a bank, so it's kind of old fashioned. So it's mainly waterfall. So basically, so we have our developer who will create the new build, and then they would send it to us in QA, and then we test it, find any issues, send it back, they create a new build, and once the build comes back, then they create a new build and they send it back, and we test it, and the issues, it goes back again, and then it comes to us. Once it's done, then it moves on to the next stage, which is REL. And if REL find any issues, they send it back to us, and then we test it to make sure, and it goes back again, and then if it's done, it goes all the way to production. So it was a waterfall method. Now, having said that, for the fast patching, we introduced some agile elements. That was my initiative, because we couldn't really do a waterfall way of doing it for that regard, because the time was so short. So since it was going to be 2 weeks, and a sprint in agile is generally like 2 weeks, I thought it was a good idea to introduce some agile elements. So with that, we're just more agile elements. There's also some other products as well I was working on. For example, there was a short project I worked on for regulations for the team, and that was mainly agile. So we had that in various sprints. So again, it was mainly waterfall, but we were trying to introduce agile over time.
And if you don't mind me asking, how did the team react to that suggestion?
Well, the Japanese team were very reluctant at first, but they kind of couldn't argue with my logic, because they said, "Look, it's going to be 2 weeks. Like, that's already agile. You're already introducing agile elements anyway." So it was hard to, like, there was some resistance. It required some level of, like, I guess, cleverness on my end to make sure that I was able to just, like, slowly introduce this over time. And it was a slow iteration process, really, but they'd opened the door themselves a bit by saying it had to be 2 weeks. So I was able to, like, jump off that and introduce more and more elements for the testing. And with that, they became more and more comfortable. Again, you have to understand, I'm fighting against a very conservative, very slow to change company, because this company, they actually lose their mind if they would see, like, if the icon changed and no one told them, they would go crazy. So change is quite difficult in this bank, but I was able to introduce it over time once I was able to, like, convince them of its utility.
Okay, and your teammates, do they have any experience with Agile as well, or was this process introduced from scratch?
Since from scratch, basically, yeah. So basically, I had experience with Agile because I had knowledge of Agile before studying in my IT uh, course. But well, actually, some of my colleagues did work in development. They worked somewhat in Agile, so it wasn't entirely from scratch. But the Japanese team, it was from scratch. They worked strictly in waterfall. So again, we had the previous knowledge, and it required a bit of iteration and time over from our end, but it was pretty much built from the ground up.
Okay. And can you give me a few of the Agile ceremonies and what you do with it?
So basically, we had daily stand-ups was one, making sure that we had uh, making sure that we were all on board for what we're doing every single day. And on top of that, we had basically 2 week sprints. On top of that, we created basically story points, basically for each element of the testing, particularly for that was done particularly for the compliant and the regulation product. And we would assign the story points and how much effort that would take for it to be accomplished. And we have the overall story points as well for the product in general, making sure they're kind of aligned. We also did some pre-planning meetings as well to ensure that like once we were performing testing, we were aware of the various elements that need to be tested, and we had story points associated with them, and then we would go down kind of in user stories in this stage case. So it came to kind of like high level testing scenarios, and then we went lower to test cases, which had lower, which you could conceptualize as user stories in a sense, and they had lower yeah, users. Sorry, they had lower what you call them, story points, and then we will make sure that the story points would add up basically to the higher level testing scenario. And with that, we were able to stay on point, and we were able to then like keep track of the velocity as well as we were going forwards, basically, and making sure that every single time, every month we did the testing, we were able to increase the velocity somewhat. So we had this much to do, but we achieved this much. Okay, let's try and get that fixed. The next month we had this much to do, and we achieved this much, and then it was slowly like balancing out. So it took time, but we actually got there and we got quite effective after a while. Now we just need to introduce some automation and we should be even more effective.
Good. So you participate in estimating tickets as well.
Yep, basically estimating again. It's estimating. It also could be called guesstimating, but the thing about testing is like once you test products enough, you do get kind of a sixth sense for the sort of thing. Kind of can gauge it, but sometimes you can be wrong. But for the most part, my instincts are pretty sharp at this point when it comes to this product.
Okay. So in your experience, how soon do you start testing?
How soon do we start testing? It very much depends on the product, really. Ideally, once the product has been developed, created by development, basically, um, once it's been created by development, it really should be sent to QA. But the problem is, you can only start testing once you've been given a proper heads up. You can't just be dropped into it without any like prior knowledge, because that's a recipe for disaster. So you start testing the moment the project really gets introduced to you, and you start preparing your test cases, your test strategy, your test matrices. That's all testing. I know it's not technically testing, but it is testing. So the moment the project gets introduced to you and you've brought into the project and you start doing your preparation, you're starting your testing as far as I'm concerned. Then it becomes a case of getting ready before that, and then once the bill gets brought in and you start and it's in QA, and then you perform the actual testing. But as far as I'm concerned, the moment the project is introduced to you and you brought into it, and you start preparing first, you've already started testing.
Okay. And you mentioned before that you're familiar with test plans, correct?
Test plans, yes.
Yeah. What project details do you usually specify in a test plan?
So when I was creating the test plan for Farcosoft, which was the ISO project, we had to basically describe what the change was going to be implemented, how it was going to be implemented into Farcosoft, the differences between the product before we implemented the change and afterwards, the various message types as well is what we need to introduce, which basically like what message types were going to be affected and how. Then we needed to introduce the level of number of resources, number of testers that were there that were going to cover this, the time frame, expected results, and we also needed basically buy-in from various stakeholders. And once we got all those details, we basically were able to cross-reference them together. And once we got buy-in from like the higher level stakeholders, we were able to proceed forward with that.
Okay. And would you know the difference between a test plan and a test suite?
A test plan and the what? Sorry,
A test suite?
a test suite. Um, I haven't actually heard the term test suite before. I suppose a test plan really is like the higher level plan you have for the project itself. I mean, a test suite in my mind would be the basically the list of test cases we have prior. So the test plan could require you to use some of those test suites basically, um, and create new test cases as well to add to the suite. But if you just say, but the difference, but the test suite itself is just a list of tests you have prior, as far as I'm aware on my end. But that may not cover what you need for a test. So a test plan might include some of that, and also might include some new tests as well.
Okay. And you mentioned before that you have experience doing regression testing. Have you
Hmm.
done smoke testing as well?
Very minimal smoke testing on my end. We did some for the compliance, not compliance with the regulation product. Basically, did from some smoke testing in that regard, but it's quite minimal experience on my end.
Okay. And are you familiar with requirements traceability matrix?
Requirements traceability matrix. No, I would be familiar with that. I do. We did do a lot of requirements gathering on my end. So basically, we would like gather the information from the various stakeholders and we'd bring it together. And from that, we would try and analyze what exactly they needed in terms of testing. So oftentimes this was just what functionality needed to be covered and what was the expected result, and what functionality didn't need to be covered, and what functionality uh, may not as be as an need to be covered may not be as important if it failed, because there's certain functionality that if it fails the product is broken, and some functionality if it fails it wouldn't be a huge detriment to the bank because it's already used. So I would gather requirements in that regard and then bring them together and then collectivize it and then basically create my test cases based on that information from the requirements gathering.
Okay. So are you familiar with the pesticide paradox?
Pesticide paradox. I believe so. It's the more you use the pesticides, the less it becomes effective. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure how it relates to testing. Is like I suppose in testing terms, I guess the more you test, maybe the less effective it becomes. I don't know if that refers to us as testers. The more we test, the less aware we become of defects, perhaps. But I'm not really sure how that relates to testing itself.
Right. Um, but would you know or would you be able to explain how to avoid it?
In terms of testing, well, oftentimes training someone else, I suppose, on our end would be a good way to like avoid basically testers who kind of can't see the defects anymore. So if they get someone else in and they train them, not only does it increase their career and their knowledge, it basically will also get fresh eyes on it, and they'll be able to see the issues that maybe the person who's been testing this for years can't see because they're just so used to just firing off tests and not really as engaged as they once were. On top of that, automation is always a good way to avoid that, because the automation doesn't have the same issue that we would. On top of that, as well, varying the tests as well, creating new test scripts that basically would maybe change up the test a bit, would keep it fresh in the mind of the testers, or maybe add new elements of the test to the script that would make the tester more aware. So I think those are some ways we can avoid the pesticide paradox.
Okay. So I guess when you're testing, you find several issues, right? Or defects.
Yeah.
So when logging a defect, what details do you usually include?
So basically, we raise a bug on Quality Center, and we would Uh, we would basically begin by what test script this failed on, and then we would go on what the expected result was and what the actual result was, and then we would refer to a screenshot basically and make sure there's data, and then we would also include potential follow or potential damage to the product, because that's more of an estimation on our end, and then we would send it back to the development team basically for review. And then if the if it's basically if our stakeholders all agree it's a bug, then we have to send back the build, and they have to create a new build, and they have to send back the whole thing.
Okay. So how do you handle defects or issues that are difficult to replicate?
Well, in that case, we have to get onto them immediately. The issue with ones that are hard to replicate, if you just leave them off, you can be like scratching your head entirely. So the moment you find them, you need to take screenshots, and even if you can, like record your screen of what happened, so you know exactly what went down. So with that, it's basically just move quickly. Don't stand still. Don't try and leave it up for like a day, because then it is truly lost. And gather the information you can as quickly as you can. Then it just becomes a case of just trying again and again until you get it. Again, it's quite difficult. It depends on well if they're time consuming as well. Sometimes you have to set aside time in order to do it, but oftentimes it's just a case of just powering through and just getting it as close as you can. But the main thing I would say is once you discover a defect that's hard to replicate, you must move quickly to replicate it as soon as possible.
Okay. So have you encountered an escape defect before, or a defect that made it to production?
Yes, that has unfortunately happened. See, the problem with testing in general is you could test an application for the rest of your life, and you still won't test every single aspect of it. At a certain point, you just have to get as wide a range as possible, wide as possible, and you need to do it as effectively as possible. There will always be something that slips between the cracks. So there have been production defects released, and that has always caused issues. The big thing there is, look, fingers always get pointed at QA. Look, it's unfortunate, but like we are kind of the guinea pigs. If things go right, we don't get the credit, and if things go wrong, we get the blame. So it's this is how it is. In that regard, we have to analyze, go back to the test plan and the test strategy, and then we need to explain how this got through. So it might have gone through because maybe we missed something in the testing. Now, often that hasn't really happened because I've been very diligent with that. But if an escape defect happened, it basically has happened because we didn't cover something in our testing. Now, if that's the case, we have a specific reason why we didn't cover it in our testing. In that regard, we can defend the issue to our stakeholders and then refer to them saying, well, you bought into this. This is why you get buy-in before you do any testing. In the test strategy, is why test strategy is so important. And then it becomes harder to point fingers, and then we all have to learn from that and move forward. Then we iterate that in the next build, and we learn from that lesson, and we move to the next stage. If it's a bug that we did testing with and we didn't see, this is where screenshots are very important. They're very tedious, and people don't like doing them. You have to, because then we took a screenshot, here's a test evidence, show it to them. This was fine when we tested this. I know why it's got through now. And that shows that there's a certain element of maybe something changed and we weren't aware of, or maybe there was a code change development never told us about. But again, really at the core for this is documentation for the strategy and documentation when you're executing, and you get yourself covered pretty well. But beyond just covering yourself, you need to be aware of making sure this doesn't happen again and taking the knowledge forward into your next test strategy or next test plans.
Okay, great. So let's say, for example, you're testing a field, for example, a pin code, right? And
Mm,
the input must be numeric. It only
right.
accepts 4 to 6 characters, and it must not start with a zero. So how will you write the test cases for this?
Well, first I would write a test matrix before I would write test cases, because again, let's try and get as wide a range as possible. So I create a test matrix. So first test would be a negative test if I don't write zero, for example. Then the next test would be if I write all. First, if I don't write zero, then write zero. And then I would next step would be so it's 4 to 6, so 4 characters, and then I'll create like maybe a list of a range of 4 characters, and then 5 characters create a range of 5 characters, and then 6 characters create a range of 6 characters. Then I would do some negative testing, which would be trying to enter letters, and then I would create after that trying to enter symbols, and then I would create basically a range of different tests in that regard, and from that I can then create the test cases, which were basically drawn from the test matrix. So again, so let's reiterate. So it's first of all we begin with starting with not starting with 0, and we're going to range of tests there. So it could be like just 3, even 3 to 5 even, and then with 0 and 4 digits basically, and then we do 0 and 5 and 0 and 6. Then we do then we could try as well testing less than 4 as well. So we have less than 4. Then we have a range of that. And then we do just letters and see if that causes any issues. And then we do symbols and see if that does any issues. And from that test matrices, I can create a list of test cases, which I can execute, which can then be used to see if the product itself has any bugs.
Good. I just need to know, do you also write test summary reports?
Yep. So yeah,
Okay.
that's that again. I'm very stickler for documentation, but yeah, once the test is done, we basically go through the whole thing. I often just take maybe a screenshot of our test in Quality Center, and then maybe even a link to our test suite basically, and our test cases. And then on top of that, it becomes I have like maybe a link to our test strategy, so they can refer to that. And then we just go through all the test results basically. I basically just like take a screenshot of everything and then go through every single test cases and their result, and then making sure that basically the our customer or our stakeholders are aware of every single frame of information they could possibly have. And this includes bug reports and any issues we encounter in terms of environmental issues and time lost, because again, sometimes you lose time because the environment isn't set up properly or there's something wrong with the environment, you can't fix this and you have to wait till it gets fixed. This has often happened. And then we keep track as well of our time frame as well, everything that happened between that and our resources, and basically just as much information as possible. Because again, if there's an escape log, this is going to be referred to, and this is basically our line of defense to show them that we did as much as we could on our end. Because again, lack of documentation, like we could have done it, we could have done anything without documentation. With documentation, we did our absolute utmost.
Okay, good. So QA is not just about testing, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
it's yeah,
and
the whole way.
you've led projects before. Were you able to discuss the definition of done to the rest of the team?
Yeah. So we basically had a discussion about that. So the really interesting one, really, in definition that was done was, for the fast patching product. So like, what was the definition of done? Basically, we had to agree on not only were the test cases completed pre-patch, but they were saved and the information was saved and documented for comparison. Not only was they completed post-patch, but the information was again saved and then it was compared. So it was a kind of a strange one in that regard because they had extra steps in a sense, because the test wasn't done when it was done. It was done when it was done and compared, and there was no discrepancy. So the discrepancy was big on that one. In terms of Farcosoft, the definition of done there was making sure that the new message type went through as if it was the old message type. So that was more straightforward. That was more on point. On top of that, making sure that there were no negative tests, tests that didn't use the format that got through. So yeah, I have discussed various elements. Again, it can get complicated when it comes to stakeholders who don't really understand testing, because they kind of want the definition of done that everything is tested. So I have to explain to them, well, that's not possible. We need to just get a wide range as possible. And we get these tests done, and that's the closest we can get to this being as done as possible. But for the most part, yeah, they are pretty much on board with us.
Okay. Last question. What made you decide to pursue QA as opposed to, like, in your previous work, you were tech support or NOC
Yeah,
commander?
yeah. So I chose QA because quite frankly, I just thought it was a good use of my skills I learned in my education. So I studied history and politics. Now, history and politics teaches you to think critically. So you're given, something, and you have to like question it and test it and think about it, and you never take anything at face value, basically. Then I have IT skills, which I learned all about computers and stuff, and you combine them. Basically, QA just hit that sweet spot between them because you got your QA, you can get like, for example, a test that passes, but this wasn't supposed to pass this way. So it does require a lot of critical thinking when it comes to testing. On top of that, you're basically designed, to break stuff and to like be given, the information you're given a product and basically trying to stress test it as much as possible. So again, it just seemed like a good mix of critical thinking and my technical knowledge, and quite frankly, it's just a lot of fun. Quite and also on top of that, look, I have a tendency to break technology for some reason. They have some like magic like aura around me that the technology just breaks around me. So I thought I might as well get paid for it as well. It's always like funny trying to see me go through an airport where like I can't seem to get through the electronic passport thing. It always breaks. So yeah, this QA just seemed like the perfect fit for me, quite frankly.
Great, good to know. So yeah, actually that concludes all of my questions, and we are almost out of time. But if you want, I can send you another meeting invite for the feedback. Will that be cool?
Okay, yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah,
Okay, so I'll end the recording now.